I reject this bond. The silence in that ceremonial hall could have stopped hearts. Willow just said no to the Alpha King, in front of 300 wolves. Now it's 3 months later, she's cornered at a frozen river, and the massive black wolf with red eyes blocking her escape just shifted into the man she humiliated. Dominic's first words in 90 days? You made me chase you across 6 states. Tonight, you find out why that was a mistake. Subscribe if you think saying no shouldn't be a death sentence. Silence supports predators like Dominic. Dorinda's lungs burned as she pushed through the dense Colorado forest, her worn boots slipping on patches of ice hidden beneath fallen leaves. Every breath created small clouds in the freezing air, every exhale a potential beacon for the predator she knew was coming. She'd felt him getting closer for the past 2 days, that suffocating pressure in her chest that came from a mate bond she'd rejected but couldn't fully sever. Her backpack dug into her shoulders, carrying everything she owned, 3 changes of clothes, her grandmother's journal, the last $200 to her name, and a stolen map marking the location of the sanctuary pack. Just 15 more miles. 15 miles and she'd cross into Alpha Cadmus's territory, where even an Alpha King's authority couldn't reach her. The branch snapped behind her before she heard the growl. Not close, but not far enough. Dorinda's heart kicked against her ribs, adrenaline flooding her system as she picked up her pace. The trees seemed to close in around her, their bare branches reaching like skeletal fingers in the moonlight. She'd made it 6 states without him catching her. She'd worked as a diner waitress in Nevada, a hotel cleaner in Utah, a grocery store stalker in Wyoming. She'd changed her appearance 3 times, cut her long black curls short and dyed them brown, wore contacts to hide her distinctive amber eyes. She'd done everything right. But Dominic Steele was an Alpha King for a reason. The man had resources she couldn't compete with, trackers, informants, technology, and that damned supernatural ability all Alpha Kings possessed to sense their territory's boundaries and the wolves within them. Even though she'd crossed out of his official territory months ago, he'd invoked some ancient bullshit law that let him pursue a rejected mate anywhere in North America. Another sound, this time to her left. Dorinda's stomach dropped. He was hurting her. Cutting off escape routes, forcing her in a specific direction. She veered right, her breath coming in harsh gasps now, her muscles screaming from 3 hours of running. The river appeared suddenly through the trees, its water black and churning with snowmelt from the mountains. 40 feet across, maybe 50. The bridge she'd marked on her map was supposed to be a mile upstream, but she didn't have a mile. She had minutes at best. Dorinda skidded to a stop at the water's edge, her hands shaking as she stared at the rapids. The temperature had to be near freezing. If she went in, she might not make it across. But if she didn't? The massive black wolf emerged from the tree line 30 feet behind her, and every rational thought evaporated from Dorinda's mind. He was enormous, easily twice the size of a normal wolf, his fur so dark it seemed to absorb the moonlight. Red eyes, the mark of an Alpha King in wolf form, locked onto her with an intensity that made her knees weak. Dominic didn't advance. He just stood there, his chest heaving from the chase, watching her with those unnatural eyes. The mate bond flared between them, trying to pull her toward him, whispering that she was safe now, that she could stop running, that he would take care of everything. The bond was a liar. Stay back, Dorinda said, her voice steadier than she felt. Her hand dropped to the silver knife on her belt, the only weapon she had. Silver could hurt werewolves, slow them down, but it wouldn't stop an Alpha King. Nothing really could. The wolf's lips pulled back, revealing teeth designed to tear through flesh and bone. But he didn't attack. Instead, he shifted, and Dorinda forced herself not to look away as the transformation rippled through his body. Bones cracked and reformed, fur receded into tanned skin, and within seconds Dominic Steele stood before her in human form. He was just as intimidating as she remembered. 6'4", built like he spent every day training for war, with shoulder-length dark hair and a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't twisted with barely controlled rage. He'd pulled on pants from somewhere. Wolves who shifted regularly always stashed clothes along their routes, but his muscled chest was bare despite the freezing temperature. 3 months, Dominic said, his voice rough from the shift. 3 months you've been running from me, Dorinda. Making me look weak in front of every alpha in the region. Making a mockery of sacred mate bonds and pack law. I rejected that bond, Dorinda shot back, gripping her knife tighter. I had every right according to moon law. You're the one who violated tradition by refusing to let me go. His jaw clenched. You rejected it in front of 300 witnesses. You humiliated me. You think I was just going to let you walk away after that? Yes. That's exactly what you were supposed to do. Dorinda's voice rose, 3 months of fear and exhaustion breaking through her control. The law says a rejected mate bond has to be accepted by both parties. You were supposed to let me leave peacefully. Instead, you trapped me in your territory like a prisoner, then hunted me like an animal when I finally escaped. Something flickered across Dominic's face, anger, yes, but something else underneath it. Something almost like hurt, which was ridiculous because Alpha Kings didn't get hurt. They didn't have feelings beyond pride and possession. You're my mate, he said, taking a step forward. Dorinda immediately moved back, her boots now inches from the river's edge. The moon goddess chose us for each other. That bond is sacred. You don't just reject it because what? Because you heard some rumors? Because you're scared of your own destiny? I'm scared of you. The words exploded out of Dorinda before she could stop them. I watched you for 3 years, Dominic. I saw how you treated Omegas in your pack. Like we're beneath you. Like we're tools to be used and discarded. I saw what you did to Alara when she spoke out of turn at the council meeting. You banished her to the border territories for having an opinion. She disrespected pack hierarchy. She disagreed with a war decision that would have gotten her brother killed. Dorinda's hands were shaking now, but not from cold. You sent her away to the most dangerous part of your territory because she dared to speak. So yeah, when that mate bond snapped into place, all I could think about was spending the rest of my life walking on eggshells, waiting for the day I disrespect you somehow and you decide I'm not worth keeping around. Dominic stared at her, his red eyes fading back to their natural dark brown as his wolf receded. For the first time since appearing, he looked uncertain. I would never hurt you. You're my mate. Your mate. Your property. Dorinda's laugh was bitter. You just spent 3 months proving my point, Dominic. You didn't chase me because you care about me. You chased me because I'm something that belongs to you, and Alpha Kings don't tolerate losing their possessions. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of rushing water and Dorinda's harsh breathing. She watched his hands clench and unclench at his sides, watched the internal war playing out across his face. If you can't stand men who treat women like property instead of people, comment everyone deserves freedom. Only those who support control and dominance won't speak up. You don't know anything about why I chased you, Dominic finally said, his voice low and dangerous. You don't know what these 3 months have been like. Tracking you through 6 states, arriving in towns hours after you'd left, finding your scent mixed with other males. I worked with people. I had jobs. Dorinda interrupted. God, you're so possessive you can't even handle me existing near other wolves? Do you have any idea how many rogues are out there? Dominic took another step forward, and this time Dorinda had nowhere to go. The river churned behind her, and the Alpha King blocked her front. How many would have loved to find a lone Omega with no pack protection? I've been cleaning up situations you don't even know about. Situations where rogues picked up your trail and I had to get there first. Dorinda's breath caught. You're lying. I'm not. His expression was dead serious. 2 weeks ago, in Wyoming, there was a rogue pack following your scent. 5 males. I intercepted them before they found you. Last month, in Utah, there was a lone wolf who'd been watching you at that hotel where you worked. I made sure he understood you were protected. Protected? Dorinda's voice cracked. You were stalking me. I was keeping you alive. Dominic's control finally snapped, and his voice echoed through the trees. You think you can survive as a lone Omega? You think those herbs you used to mask your scent actually worked? They bought you hours at most. The only reason you made it this far is because I was behind you, eliminating every threat before it reached you. Dorinda's mind raced, trying to process this. She thought about the nights she'd felt watched but saw nothing. The times her instinct screamed danger but no attack came. She'd assumed she was being paranoid, that 3 months of running had destroyed her nerves. But what if? You're trying to manipulate me, she said, but her voice wavered. Trying to make me feel like I owe you something. I'm telling you the truth. Dominic's voice dropped back to that dangerous calm. And whether you believe me or not doesn't change the facts. You can't keep running, Dorinda. You're exhausted. You're barely eating. I can smell the fatigue on you, see it in the way you're swaying on your feet right now. He was right, and she hated it. Dorinda hadn't slept more than 3 hours at a time in weeks. Every noise woke her, every shadow sent her running. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, her clothes hanging loose on her frame. But admitting weakness to this man felt like signing her own death warrant. The sanctuary pack you're heading toward, Dominic continued, his eyes never leaving hers, Alpha Cadmus's territory. You think they'll take you in? You think they'll risk a political incident with me by harboring my rejected mate? Dorinda's stomach sank. They accept all refugees. They accept rogues who have nowhere else to go. You're different. Taking you in would be declaring war on my territory. Cadmus is a good man, but he's not stupid. He won't sacrifice his pack's safety for one Omega. Then I'll go further. Dorinda straightened her spine, ignoring how her legs trembled. Canada. Mexico. Somewhere your authority doesn't reach. And spend the rest of your life running? Never settling down, never having a real home, always looking over your shoulder? Dominic's expression shifted to something almost like pain. That's not living, Dorinda. That's just surviving. It's better than being with someone who sees me as property. I don't, he stopped, his jaw working as he struggled with words. I didn't see you. Not really. You're right about that. I grew up believing Omegas were meant to support, to serve, to stay quiet. My father taught me that. Every Alpha King before me taught their sons that. It's how our hierarchy has worked for centuries. And that makes it right? Dorinda demanded. No. The word came out harsh, like it physically hurt him to say it. No, it doesn't make it right. It makes it tradition. And I'm learning that tradition isn't the same thing as truth. Dorinda blinked, thrown off balance by the admission. In 3 years of watching Dominic Steele, she'd never once heard him question pack tradition or hierarchy. He'd been the absolute embodiment of the old ways, unchanging and unmovable as stone. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of snow from the mountains. Dorinda's thin jacket did nothing against the cold, and her body had started that dangerous shivering that came before hypothermia. Dominic noticed, of course he noticed, with his enhanced senses, and something in his expression softened. "You're freezing," he said, starting to move toward her. Dorinda raised the silver knife, her hand shaking from more than just cold now. "Don't." He stopped immediately, his hands rising in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you. Here." He turned his back to her, reached into the hollow of a nearby tree, and pulled out a dark bundle. A jacket, thick and lined with fur. He tossed it to her underhand, letting it land at her feet rather than forcing her to take it from his hand. Dorinda stared at the jacket, then at him. "You planted supplies along the route." "I've been tracking you for 3 months, Dominic said. "I learned your patterns. Figured out you were heading toward Colorado. So yes, I stashed supplies at likely spots. Food, clothes, first aid kits. You never found them because you kept moving too fast, but they were there." "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Because somewhere between Montana and here, I realized something." Dominic turned back to face her, and the vulnerability in his expression was so foreign on his usually controlled features that Dorinda's breath caught. "You were right to reject me. The man I was 3 months ago didn't deserve you. He didn't deserve anyone. He was so focused on power and control and maintaining authority that he forgot what actually matters." "And what's that?" Dorinda asked, her knife lowering slightly. "Choice." The word hung in the frozen air between them. "You should have had a choice. Not just in accepting or rejecting the bond, but in everything. In how you're treated, in whether you're heard, in what kind of life you want to live. I took that from you by trying to trap you in the territory. I took it from Alara and every other Omega who was ever afraid to speak in my presence." Dorinda's hand trembled, the knife's point now aimed at the ground. You can't expect me to believe you've changed. People don't change that fast. Especially not Alpha Kings who've spent their whole lives believing they're entitled to control everyone around them." "You're right," Dominic agreed, and that shocked her more than anything. "I haven't fully changed. I still have instincts that tell me to command, to demand, to take what I want. But I'm trying to fight those instincts now. And I'm willing to spend however long it takes proving to you that I can be better." The river rushed behind Dorinda, offering an escape route that might kill her. Dominic stood before her, offering, what, exactly? A second chance? A different kind of prison, wrapped in prettier words? "If I come back with you," Dorinda said slowly, "what happens? You parade me around as your mate? Force me to complete the bond?" "No." Dominic's voice was firm. "If you come back, and that's if, because I'm giving you a choice right now, you come back as your own person. You keep your job at the hospital. You live wherever you want. The bond stays rejected unless you decide otherwise. I just want the chance to know you. To prove I can respect an Omega's autonomy. To show you I'm capable of being more than what my father raised me to be." Dorinda stared at him, searching for the lie, the manipulation, the trap. But his eyes were clear, his posture open despite the cold eating into his bare skin. He was shivering now too, she realized. Standing there in the freezing temperature in just pants, making himself vulnerable while she decided his fate. "And if I say no?" she asked. If I choose to jump in that river and take my chances? Pain flashed across Dominic's face, real and raw. Then I let you go. I go back to my territory. I accept the rejection properly, the way I should have 3 months ago. I leave you alone. You'd really do that? After chasing me across 6 states? I'd really do that. He took a slow breath. Because forcing you to stay would just prove you were right about me all along. And I need to be better than that. I need to be someone worthy of. He stopped, shook his head. I need to be better. Period. Whether you're there to see it or not. The silence stretched between them, filled with possibilities and consequences. Dorinda's mind spun through scenarios, weighing risks and chances. If she jumped in that river, she might make it to the other side. Or she might drown. If she went with Dominic, she might get the life of autonomy he promised. Or she might be walking back into a cage with better bars. Then she noticed the way he was standing, not blocking her path to the river, but slightly to the side, leaving her a clear route to the water if she wanted it. He'd positioned himself to give her the choice he kept talking about. It was a small thing, maybe meaningless. But it was also something the old Dominic Steele never would have done. I need guarantees, Dorinda said finally. Real ones. Not just your word. Hope lit up Dominic's face. Anything. I want it in writing, witnessed by the Pack Council. My own residence, my job, my freedom to come and go as I please. The rejected bond stays rejected, and you don't pressure me about it. Ever. And if I decide to leave again, you let me go. No chasing, no hunting, no ancient laws invoked. I walk away free and clear. Done. He didn't even hesitate. We'll have the documents drawn up as soon as we're back. The council will witness them. And I'll announce to every alpha in the region that you're under my protection but not my control. That anyone who disrespects your autonomy answers to me. Dorinda studied him for a long moment, then slowly lowered the knife completely. I'm not promising anything beyond coming back and seeing if you're serious about this. I don't trust you, Dominic. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That's fair, he said quietly. Trust is earned. I'm willing to put in the work. She bent down, picked up the jacket he'd thrown, and pulled it on. It was massive on her, clearly his, and it smelled like pine and winter and that distinctive scent that marked him as her mate. The bond hummed in approval, but Dorinda shoved that feeling down ruthlessly. The bond wanted completion. She wanted truth. One more thing, Dorinda said as she settled the jacket around her shoulders. Elara, the Omega you banished. She gets to come back. Full reinstatement to whatever position she held before, with a formal apology from you in front of the same council where you banished her. Dominic's expression tightened. This one clearly cost him more, asking him to publicly admit error, but after a moment, he nodded. Agreed. Dorinda took a step toward him, away from the river, and watched relief flood his features. But she kept the knife in her hand, visible. A reminder that one wrong move, one broken promise, and she'd be gone again. This time for good. We walk back, she said. No shifting, no running ahead, no trying to carry me or any other alpha male nonsense. We walk side by side like equals, and you tell me about these rogues you supposedly saved me from. Every detail. And if I catch you in even one lie, I'm gone. No lies, Dominic promised. Not anymore. As they turned away from the river and back toward civilization, Dorinda couldn't shake the feeling that she was either making the best decision of her life or the biggest mistake. Only time would tell which. But at least this time it was her choice to make. And maybe that was what mattered most. Comment: Omegas deserve respect if you believe in equality, not domination. Silence supports the old hierarchy. They walked for 2 hours in tense silence before Dominic finally spoke. The forest had given way to rolling hills, and the sky was starting to lighten with the approaching dawn. Dorinda's exhaustion hit her in waves, but she refused to slow down or show weakness. The first rogue situation was in Nevada, Dominic said, his voice breaking the quiet. You were working at that diner on the edge of Carson City. There was a male who'd been banned from 3 different packs for violence against Omegas. He picked up your scent and started asking questions around town. Dorinda's blood ran cold. She remembered that diner, remembered the night she'd felt watched through the windows. She'd assumed it was paranoia. What happened to him? I made it clear that touching you meant death. Dominic's voice was matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. He left town that night. I followed him for 20 miles to make sure he kept going. You didn't kill him? No. Dominic glanced at her. I know what you think of me, but I'm not a murderer. I only kill in defense of my pack or in formal challenges. This male got a warning and a permanent scar to remember it by. Dorinda processed this as they walked. Part of her wanted to argue that violence was never the answer, but she'd lived as a lone Omega for 3 months. She knew exactly what males like that would do to an unprotected female if given the chance. Tell me about the others. Dominic detailed each incident as they walked, the rogue pack in Wyoming that he'd intercepted before they tracked her to the hotel, the lone wolf in Utah who'd been planning to wait for her after her shift ended. With each story, Dorinda's understanding of her journey shifted. She hadn't made it this far on luck or skill. She'd made it because Dominic had been running interference without her knowledge. Why didn't you just grab me? She asked as they crossed into a cleared area that might have once been farmland. Any of those times you were close enough to save me from rogues, you were close enough to force me to come back. Because you would have fought me, Dominic said simply. And I was starting to realize that I didn't want you fighting. I wanted. He trailed off, struggling with words. I wanted you to choose me. Not the bond, not the politics, not the power. Me. The actual man behind the title. That's a pretty evolved thought for someone who tried to trap me in his territory. I had a lot of time to think while tracking you. Dominic's mouth twisted into something that might have been self-deprecation. A lot of time alone in my wolf form, following your trail, imagining what I'd say when I caught up. At first, it was all anger. How dare you reject me? How dare you make me look weak? How dare you run? But somewhere around Utah, I started asking myself different questions. Like what? Like why did you reject me in the first place? He looked at her directly. And not the surface reason, I'm an Alpha King, you're an Omega, of course you'd want that bond. But the real reason. What about me specifically made you willing to risk everything to get away? They crested a hill, and Dorinda could see lights in the distance, a small town, maybe, or the outskirts of someone's territory. She pulled Dominic's jacket tighter around herself, using the movement to hide how much his words affected her. I started watching you back, Dominic continued. These past 3 months, I've seen you work 3 different jobs. I've watched you help that elderly woman carry her groceries in Nevada. I've seen you share your food with homeless shifters even when you barely had enough for yourself. I've witnessed you stand up to a drunk male twice your size when he was harassing a waitress at that diner. You were stalking me, Dorinda said, but there was no heat in it. I was trying to understand you. Dominic stopped walking, and after a moment, Dorinda stopped too. They stood facing each other as dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. And the more I watched, the more I realized you're nothing like what I assumed Omegas were. You're brave and strong and more capable than half my elite guards. You survive on your own, you help others even when it costs you, and you refuse to accept disrespect from anyone. Including me. So what? Dorinda crossed her arms. You developed a crush because I'm not like other Omegas? No. Dominic's voice was firm. I started to respect you because you're exactly what an Omega should be, what any wolf should be. Someone who stands up for what's right, who protects those weaker than themselves, who refuses to accept injustice just because it's traditional. You're what I should have been all along. Dorinda wanted to call bullshit, wanted to tell him pretty words didn't change centuries of Omega oppression or his personal history of enforcing it. But she could see the truth in his eyes, could hear it in his voice. Whatever had happened during these 3 months of tracking her, something fundamental had shifted in Dominic Steele. There's a motel ahead, she said, deflecting from emotions she wasn't ready to process. I need sleep. Real sleep, in an actual bed, for more than 3 hours. Of course. Dominic immediately shifted direction toward the distant lights. I'll get 2 rooms. 1 room, 2 beds. Dorinda cut him off. I'm not being alone until we're back in territory with those documents signed. For all I know, this is still some elaborate manipulation, and you're planning to grab me the second I let my guard down. Something like hurt flashed across Dominic's face, but he nodded. 1 room, 2 beds. Whatever makes you feel safe. They walked the rest of the distance in silence. The motel was one of those cheap roadside places that rented by the hour and didn't ask questions. The clerk barely looked up when Dominic paid cash for a room, and if he noticed the massive Alpha King was shirtless and the Omega beside him looked like she'd been through hell, he wisely kept his opinions to himself. The room was exactly what Dorinda expected, 2 saggy beds, a bathroom that had seen better decades, and a TV that probably only got 3 channels. But it was warm and dry and had locks on the door, so it felt like a palace after months of sleeping in bus stations and abandoned buildings. Dominic headed straight for the bathroom. I'm going to shower. The door doesn't lock. I broke the mechanism months ago when I installed these emergency rooms along the route, but I give you my word I won't come out until you tell me it's okay. Dorinda frowned. You installed emergency rooms? Stocked them too. Clean clothes, food, medical supplies. I was hoping you'd find one when you needed rest. He gestured around the dingy space. I paid for a year's rent on 5 different rooms across 3 states. This one, 3 others between here and your last location, and 1 near the Sanctuary Pack border. Just in case. The casual way he said it, like spending thousands of dollars on rooms she might never use was no big deal, left Dorinda speechless. This wasn't the action of a man who just wanted his property back. This was someone who'd genuinely been trying to keep her safe, even while chasing her. Why didn't you leave me notes? She asked. If you were stocking rooms and leaving supplies, why not tell me you were trying to help? Dominic's expression turned pained. Because I was still figuring out what I wanted. Part of me wanted to catch you and drag you back, prove I was still in control. Part of me wanted you to succeed, to make it to the Sanctuary Pack and find the freedom you were looking for. I was at war with myself, and I didn't think you needed my confusion on top of everything else you were dealing with. He disappeared into the bathroom before she could respond, and moments later, she heard the shower start. Dorinda stood frozen in the middle of the room, trying to reconcile this version of Dominic with the cold Alpha King she'd rejected 3 months ago. She moved to the window, peering through the stained curtains at the parking lot beyond. 3 months ago, she'd been so certain about her decision. Dominic was a tyrant who saw Omegas as tools. The mate bond was a trap. Running was her only option for freedom. But now? Now nothing was clear anymore. Dorinda pulled out her grandmother's journal from her backpack, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. She hadn't opened it since the funeral, couldn't bear to read the words of someone who'd believed in her so completely. But now, exhausted and confused and standing at a crossroads, she needed guidance. She flipped to a random page and read. True strength isn't in dominating others, my dear Dorinda. It's in choosing to be vulnerable despite the risk. Anyone can build walls. It takes courage to let someone see behind them. And sometimes, the people who seem most powerful are actually the most desperate for someone to see them as human. Dorinda closed the journal, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. Was that what she was seeing in Dominic? A powerful man desperate to be seen as something more than his title? The shower shut off, and after a moment, Dominic called through the door, I'm dressed. Is it okay to come out? Yeah, Dorinda said, setting the journal aside. Dominic emerged in fresh jeans and a black t-shirt he must have had stashed in the room. His long hair was wet and pushed back from his face, making him look younger, less intimidating. Without the trappings of power and authority, he looked human. Just a man who'd made mistakes and was trying to be better. Your turn, he said, gesturing to the bathroom. I left clean clothes on the counter. They might be big, but they're warm. Dorinda grabbed her backpack and headed for the bathroom, pausing at the door. Dominic? Yeah? Thank you. For the supplies. For keeping me safe even when I didn't know it. For. She struggled for words. For trying. His smile was small but genuine. You're welcome. Dorinda closed the bathroom door behind her, ignoring the broken lock, choosing to trust even though every survival instinct screamed against it, and started the shower. As hot water washed away 3 months of dirt and fear and exhaustion, she let herself cry for the first time since running. She cried for the scared Omega who'd rejected her mate in front of 300 wolves. She cried for the grandmother who'd never see her settled and safe. She cried for the girl she'd been who thought the world was black and white, who thought she knew exactly who the villains and heroes were. Because the truth was so much more complicated than that. The Alpha King who'd seemed like a monster was capable of change. The Omega who'd run for freedom was choosing to walk back into the territory she'd escaped. And the mate bond she'd rejected might actually lead somewhere worth going. Or it might all be a beautiful lie, and she'd end up more trapped than before. But that was the thing about courage, wasn't it? You never knew the ending when you made the choice. You just had to trust yourself enough to try. Like if you believe people deserve second chances, but only if they earn them. The toxic ones who expect forgiveness without change won't engage. Dorinda woke to sunlight streaming through the motel curtains and the smell of coffee. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back in her grandmother's house, that the past 3 months had been a nightmare. Then she saw Dominic sitting at the small table by the window, 2 steaming cups in front of him, and reality crashed back. Morning, he said quietly, not moving from his spot. There's a coffee place down the road. I got you a vanilla latte. I remembered from watching you at that cafe in Utah that you always ordered. He stopped, seeming to realize how that sounded. Sorry. That's creepy, isn't it? That I paid attention to your coffee order. Dorinda sat up, surprised to find she'd slept for 6 hours straight. 6 hours without nightmares, without startling awake at every sound. It's observant, she said carefully. Creepy would be if you'd tampered with it. I didn't. Dominic pushed the cup toward the empty chair across from him. It's still sealed from the shop. You can check. She did check, not because she thought he'd drugged it, but because 3 months of running had made paranoia a survival skill. The seal was intact. Dorinda broke it and took a sip, the familiar sweetness and caffeine hitting her system like a blessing. We should talk about logistics, Dominic said, wrapping his hands around his own cup. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. It's a 12-hour drive back to the territory. We could rent a car, or I could call for pack transport, or we could take our time and stop along the way. Whatever you're comfortable with. Stopping along the way sounds good. Dorinda wasn't ready to be surrounded by pack members yet, wasn't ready for the questions and stares and judgment that would come when word got out the rejected mate had returned. But I have conditions. Name them. We don't tell anyone I'm coming back until those documents are signed and witnessed. I don't want pack gossip or pressure or anyone trying to interfere before my autonomy is guaranteed in writing. Dominic nodded immediately. I'll have my lawyer draft the documents while we travel. We can do the signing and witnessing as soon as we cross the territory border. Anything else? I want to talk to Alara before she's brought back. Hear her side of what happened, make sure she actually wants to return. Dorinda met his eyes over the coffee cup. Because if you're serious about respecting Omega autonomy, that starts with not making decisions for us. Even decisions that seem helpful. Something in Dominic's expression shifted, respect, maybe, or admiration. Agreed. I'll arrange a call once we're close enough to get good reception. You can talk to her privately, make sure she wants to come back on her own terms. They finished their coffee in companionable silence, and Dorinda found herself studying him properly for the first time since he'd appeared in the forest. Without the rage and fear coloring her perception, she could see details she'd missed, the dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept in days, the healing scratches on his arms from crashing through underbrush while tracking her, the way his hands shook slightly as he set down his cup. When's the last time you ate? She asked suddenly. Dominic looked surprised by the question. I don't, 2 days ago? Maybe 3. I was focused on closing the distance between us, so You're an idiot. Dorinda stood up, grabbed her backpack. Alpha Kings aren't invincible, Dominic. You can't track someone for 3 months without proper food and sleep and expect your body to keep functioning. I'm fine. You're shaking. She pointed at his hands. That's low blood sugar. When's the last time you shifted back to human form for more than an hour? Last week, I think. You've been in wolf form for a week straight? Dorinda's voice rose. No wonder you look like death. Your body needs time to recover between extended shifts. Even Alpha Kings have limits. Dominic stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You're worried about me? I'm worried you're going to collapse before we get back to the territory, and then I'll be stuck trying to drag your unconscious body to safety, which would really suck since you weigh about twice what I do. But the excuse sounded weak even to her own ears. The truth was, seeing him like this, exhausted and running himself into the ground, reminded her that he was more than just an Alpha King. He was a person who'd been pushing himself to his absolute limits while trying to keep her safe. And some treacherous part of her heart that she'd tried to lock away was responding to that. Get dressed, Dorinda ordered, heading for the door. We're getting you actual food before we start the drive back. The diner across the street was the kind of place that served breakfast all day and didn't judge anyone for how they looked or what they ordered. Dorinda found a booth in the back corner while Dominic ordered enough food for 3 people, eggs, bacon, pancakes, hash browns, toast, fruit, and a side of sausage that the waitress brought out on a separate plate. "This is excessive," Dorinda said, eyeing the spread. "I haven't eaten in 3 days," Dominic pointed out, already digging into the pancakes. "And you probably haven't had a proper meal in weeks." "Eat." They ate in silence, and Dorinda had to admit the food was exactly what her body needed. Hot, filling, substantial. She watched Dominic work his way through the mountain of food with single-minded focus, his shaking gradually subsiding as his blood sugar normalized. "How did your father die?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself. It wasn't something she'd ever asked about. The previous Alpha King's death had happened before she'd moved to the Nightshade territory, and it seemed rude to bring up. Dominic paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Why do you want to know?" "Because you keep mentioning what he taught you, how he raised you. I'm trying to understand where these beliefs about Omega Worth came from. Whether it was just pack tradition or something specific to your family." He set down the fork, his expression distant. "My father was old school. His father before him was even worse. The Alpha King line in our territory goes back 300 years, and for most of that time, Omegas were considered a necessary evil, needed for the pack's survival but not valued beyond their breeding potential." Dorinda's stomach turned, but she kept her expression neutral. "And your mother?" "Was an Omega." Dominic's voice was carefully controlled. "My father's mate. She died when I was 8. I'm sorry." "Don't be." His words were sharp. "She was miserable. My father treated her like a broodmare, got her pregnant 4 times in 6 years, didn't care when the pregnancies nearly killed her. She survived long enough to give him an heir, and then her body just gave up." The bitterness in his voice explained so much. Dorinda reached across the table, her hand hovering over his before pulling back. "Is that why you treat Omegas the way you do? Because you watched your mother suffer?" "I treat Omegas the way I do because I learned it from watching my father," Dominic said quietly. "He was the strongest Alpha King in generations. Everyone respected him. Everyone feared him. Everyone believed he was right about everything. So when he said Omegas were meant to serve, I believed him. When he said showing them too much respect would weaken the hierarchy, I accepted it. When he died in a challenge fight and I became Alpha King at 25, I just continued his legacy. Until I rejected you. Until you rejected me." Dominic met her eyes. "And forced me to actually look at what I'd become. What I'd accepted without question. Whether I wanted to be remembered like my father, powerful but cruel, or if there was another way to lead." The waitress came by to refill their coffee, giving them a moment to sit with the weight of that confession. When she left, Dorinda leaned forward. "What happened to your siblings?" she asked. "You said your mother had 4 pregnancies. 2 sisters, 1 brother. All died in childbirth or within the first year." Dominic's hands clenched around his coffee cup. "My father never even mourned them. Just moved on, focused on me as the heir. Told me sentiment was weakness, attachment was dangerous, caring too much made you vulnerable. That's a horrible way to raise a child. It made me strong." But there was no conviction in the words. "It made you alone," Dorinda corrected gently. "There's a difference." Dominic stared at her for a long moment, and something in his expression cracked. "I've been alone my whole life," he admitted. "Even surrounded by pack members, by guards and advisors and wolves who would die for me. None of them know me. None of them see past the title. Until you." "I don't know you either," Dorinda said honestly. I've spent 3 months running from you and the last 12 hours listening to you. That's not the same as actually knowing someone. But you're trying to understand. That's more than anyone else has ever done. He reached across the table, his hand palm up in invitation. I know I don't deserve your trust. I know I've given you every reason to hate me. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove I can change. That I am changing. That the man who tracked you wasn't the same one who tried to trap you. Dorinda looked at his outstretched hand, at the vulnerability in his eyes, at the Alpha King who was offering instead of demanding. Every logical part of her brain screamed this was a trap. But her heart, that treacherous organ that insisted on feeling compassion even for someone who'd hurt her, was whispering something different. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers immediately, warm and gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. The mate bond flared between them, stronger than ever, singing with approval at the contact. One day at a time, Dorinda said firmly. You prove yourself through actions, not words. And if you slip back into your old ways, if you try to control me or manipulate me or treat me like property, I'm gone. For good this time. One day at a time, Dominic agreed, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I can work with that. They sat there in the diner booth, hands clasped across the table, while around them, the world continued on. Truckers ordered coffee, families laughed over pancakes, the waitress hummed along to country music playing from the jukebox. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that an Alpha King and his rejected mate were sitting in their midst, negotiating the terms of a second chance. It should have felt dramatic or momentous, but instead, it felt surprisingly ordinary. Two people trying to figure out if they could trust each other. If they could build something real out of the ruins of what tradition had demanded. If change was actually possible when both parties wanted it badly enough. We should get going, Dominic said eventually, though he made no move to release her hand. Long drive ahead. Yeah. Dorinda pulled back slowly, already missing the warmth of his touch. One more thing though. Anything. Tell me about Alara. Not the official story about disrespecting hierarchy. The real story. What she said that made you so angry you banished her. Dominic's jaw tightened, but after a moment, he nodded. She called me a coward in front of the entire war council. Said I was so desperate to prove I was as strong as my father that I was willing to send wolves to die in an unnecessary border dispute just to look tough. She said I was letting fear of appearing weak dictate strategy instead of actually protecting the pack. Was she right? Yes. The word came out harsh. She was absolutely right. The border dispute was with the Silverstream pack over territory that neither of us actually needed. I was pushing for aggressive action because the previous Alpha Kings had always been willing to fight. Because I thought strength meant never backing down. Alara's brother was in the battalion I'd assigned to the front lines, and she knew he'd probably die in a conflict that served no purpose except my ego. So you banished her to cover your own embarrassment. I banished her because I couldn't handle being wrong. Dominic stood up, throwing cash on the table to cover their meal plus a generous tip. I called off the war the next day, worked out a treaty with Silverstream that gave us everything we actually needed without bloodshed. But Alara was already gone, sent to the border territories where she spent the last 2 years dealing with rogue incursions and territorial threats because I was too proud to admit I'd been wrong. They walked to the car Dominic had rented, a nondescript sedan that didn't scream Alpha King on the run, and climbed in. As Dominic started the engine, Dorinda found herself thinking about second chances and earned redemptions and whether people could truly change. She's going to hate you, Dorinda said as they pulled onto the highway. When she comes back and has to face you again. Probably, Dominic agreed. But at least she'll be home. At least I'll have apologized publicly and given her back what I took. It won't undo the 2 years she lost, but it's a start. They drove through the morning, through towns and forests and open stretches of highway, the landscape gradually shifting from Colorado mountains to the rolling hills that marked the outer edges of the Nightshade territory. Dominic pointed out landmarks, told stories about the territory's history, and carefully asked questions about Dorinda's grandmother that let her talk about the woman who'd raised her without the grief feeling quite so overwhelming. Somewhere around hour 6, Dorinda's phone, which she'd kept off to avoid being tracked, finally had enough signal to power on. She scrolled through 3 months of missed calls and texts from friends, most recent ones asking if she was alive, if she needed help, if the Alpha King had found her yet. "I need to let people know I'm okay," she said, typing out a message to her 2 closest friends. They'd been worried. Of course. Dominic kept his eyes on the road. "Tell them whatever you want. That you're coming back, that I found you, that we're working things out, whatever version of the truth you're comfortable with." Dorinda sent the message, then stared at her phone as responses started flooding in immediately. Relief, questions, warnings to be careful, offers of help if she needed to run again. Her support system had been there the whole time, even when she'd been too afraid to reach out. "We're about 3 hours from the territory border," Dominic said, glancing at the GPS. "I've been thinking about your request to talk to Alara first. Maybe instead of a call, we could drive out to the border settlement where she's stationed. That way, you can meet her in person, see the conditions I sent her to, make your judgment call based on the full picture." "That would add time to our trip." "It would add 2 hours, Dominic corrected. "But if it helps you feel more confident about the decision, it's worth it. Plus," he hesitated. "Plus, I should see what conditions I've been forcing Omega exiles to endure. Face the consequences of my decisions directly instead of hiding behind reports." Dorinda studied his profile as he drove, seeing the determination there. "Okay." We detoured to the border settlement. "But, Dominic? Whatever we find there, you deal with it. You see it all. No looking away, no delegating, no pretending the consequences of your actions don't exist." "I won't look away," he promised. "Not anymore." They drove on through the afternoon, the sun tracking across the sky, counting down to the moment when everything would change again. When they'd cross back into the territory Dorinda had fled from, when she'd have to face the pack that had witnessed her rejection, when Dominic would have to prove through actions that his words weren't empty promises. But for now, in this bubble of a rented car on a highway stretching toward an uncertain future, they were just 2 people trying to figure out if hope was foolish or brave. If second chances were gifts or traps. If the space between what you were and what you wanted to become was something you could actually cross. The answer, Dorinda suspected, was going to surprise them both. Drop a worth the weight if you believe in holding people accountable before trusting them. Those who enable abuse without accountability won't comment. The border settlement was worse than Dorinda imagined. It wasn't a settlement so much as a collection of dilapidated buildings barely holding together, surrounded by reinforced fences and guard towers. The wolves stationed here lived in constant threat from rogue attacks, worked brutal shifts patrolling dangerous territory, and had minimal resources or support from the main pack. "Jesus," Dominic breathed as they pulled up to the gate. His hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "I've been sending wolves here for years and never once visited to see what I was sending them to." A guard approached the car, his eyes widening when he recognized the Alpha King. He immediately lowered his head in submission, his posture screaming fear. "Alpha Steele, We weren't expecting, nobody told us you were, is there a problem? Where's Alara? Dominic's voice was tight. Alara Morrison, banished from the main pack 2 years ago. Medical building, sir. She runs the clinic here. The guard pointed to a sagging structure near the center of the settlement. Should I announce your arrival? No. Dominic was already out of the car. Open the gate. Dorinda followed him through the settlement, taking in the desperate conditions. Wolves with healing injuries working despite obvious pain. Children playing in dirt yards with broken toys. A food line where ration supplies were being distributed. This was what happened to wolves who displeased the Alpha King. They were sent to the bottom of the hierarchy and forgotten. The medical building was barely functional, equipment that belonged in a museum, supplies that should have been restocked months ago, beds with thin mattresses and threadbare blankets. And in the middle of this chaos stood Alara. She was younger than Dorinda expected, maybe 30, with auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun and dark circles under her eyes that spoke of chronic exhaustion. She was stitching up a wolf's arm with steady hands, murmuring reassurances to the nervous teenager, completely focused on her patient. Then she looked up and saw Dominic, and the hatred that flashed across her face could have melted steel. Get out, Alara said, her voice cold enough to freeze. I have patience. I don't have time for whatever power trip brought you slumming in the territory you dump your problems in. Alara, Dominic started. I said get out. She finished the last stitch, tied it off, and turned to face him fully. Unless you're here to tell me you're dying and need my medical expertise to save your miserable life, I want you gone. I came to apologize, Dominic said quietly. And to ask if you want to come home. The silence that followed was absolute. Every wolf in the medical building froze, staring at the Alpha King who'd just offered an apology, something none of them had ever heard from him before. Alara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Now you want to apologize? 2 years after you sent me here for having the audacity to tell you the truth? 2 years after my brother died, yes, died, because the stress of knowing I'd been banished because I tried to protect him gave him a heart attack at 35? Now you show up and think sorry is going to fix what you did? Dorinda stepped forward, drawing Alara's attention for the first time. I'm Dorinda. I'm the Omega who rejected the Alpha King's mate bond 3 months ago. I ran, he chased me, and now we're trying to figure out if he's actually capable of change or if this is all bullshit manipulation. Alara blinked, clearly not expecting that introduction. You're the one everyone's been talking about. The crazy Omega who said no to an Alpha King. That's me. Dorinda moved closer, positioning herself between Dominic and Alara. He claims he's learned from his mistakes. Claims he wants to make things right. Claims he's going to publicly apologize to you and restore you to full pack status as part of proving he's serious about respecting Omega autonomy. I told him I wanted to meet you first, hear your side, make sure you actually want this before any decisions are made for you. Something in Alara's expression softened slightly. You made the Alpha King drive 3 hours out of his way so you could ask me what I want. Yes. Dorinda held her gaze. Because if he's serious about changing, that starts with not making decisions for Omegas. Even decisions that seem helpful. Alara studied her for a long moment, then looked past Dorinda to Dominic. You brought her here. Voluntarily. Let her speak for you instead of demanding I listen to you. I'm trying to be better, Dominic said. His voice was raw with emotion. I know I failed you. I know I failed your brother. I know I failed every Omega in this pack by perpetuating a system that treats them as less than. I can't undo the past, but I'm asking, begging, for the chance to make the future different. My brother is dead because of you. I know. 2 years of my life are gone because you couldn't handle being told you were wrong. I know. I've treated wolves with injuries I couldn't properly address because you don't send adequate medical supplies to your exile settlements. Children have died here because we didn't have the resources to save them. Dominic flinched like she'd struck him. I didn't know, I didn't visit, I should have. You should have given a damn, Alara snarled. You should have checked on the wolves you sent here. You should have made sure we had what we needed to survive. But you didn't, because once we were out of sight, we were out of mind. Convenient for you. Hell for us. You're right. Dominic's voice broke. You're absolutely right about all of it. And I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, that it doesn't bring your brother back or return your lost years, but I'm sorry. For all of it. Alara turned away, her shoulders shaking. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with unshed tears. What exactly are you offering? Besides an apology. Full restoration to your previous position as head healer at the main pack hospital. Public apology in front of the pack council. Immediate upgrade of resources and support for this settlement and every other border station. A formal investigation into Omega treatment across the entire territory. And Dominic took a breath. And a memorial service for your brother, with you planning it, with the whole pack understanding he died because I was too proud to listen to wisdom when it was offered. Alara spun around, tears openly streaming down her face now. You'd do that? Honor him publicly after you're part of the reason he's dead? He deserves to be honored. You deserve to be heard. And I deserve to face the consequences of my actions instead of hiding from them. Dominic's own eyes were suspiciously bright. I can't give you back what I took. But I can give you truth and acknowledgement and the power to help reshape how this pack treats Omegas going forward. I don't trust you, Alara said bluntly. Not even a little bit. I don't trust him either, Dorinda added. But I think he might actually be trying. Alara looked between them, these two Omegas who'd stood up to the most powerful Alpha in the region and somehow were still standing. If I come back, I want full authority over medical decisions. No Alpha King override, no pack politics interfering with patient care, no budget cuts without my approval. Done, Dominic agreed immediately. And I want a seat on the pack council. A permanent one, not a temporary appointment you can revoke when I inconvenience you. Done. And you fund a scholarship in my brother's name for wolves from border settlements to attend medical school. Full ride, no strings attached. Consider it established. Dominic pulled out his phone, typing notes. Anything else? Yes. Alara crossed her arms. You come back here once a month. You see these conditions. You talk to the wolves you've forgotten. You remember that your decisions have real consequences for real people. And if you ever try to exile another wolf for telling you the truth, I will make your life a living hell. A smile tugged at Dominic's lips despite the gravity of the moment. I'd expect nothing less. They stood there in that barely functioning medical building, three wolves from different parts of the pack hierarchy, negotiating the terms of accountability and change. Around them, the settlement continued its desperate survival, but something had shifted. The Alpha King had been forced to see his failures. The exiled Omega had been given voice and power. And Dorinda had witnessed proof that Dominic's promises might actually mean something. I'll come back, Alara said finally. But I'm watching you, Steele. One slip, one sign you're reverting to your old ways, and I'm gone. And next time, I won't go quietly. I'll make sure every pack in the region knows exactly what kind of alpha king you really are. Fair enough, Dominic said. When can you be ready to travel? Give me 3 days to transition my patients to the new head healer, pack my things, say my goodbyes. Alara's expression was still hard, but some of the hate had faded from her eyes. And Steele? Don't make me regret this. I won't, he promised. Not this time. They left the settlement an hour later, after Dominic had ordered immediate supply shipments, authorized infrastructure repairs, and personally apologized to a dozen wolves who'd been sent to the border over the years. Dorinda watched him force himself to look at every broken building, every inadequate resource, every consequence of his negligence. By the time they got back in the car, Dominic looked shattered. I did that, he said, staring at the settlement in the rearview mirror as they drove away. I sent people there and never once checked if they were okay. How many wolves have suffered because I couldn't be bothered to visit? How many died because I didn't ensure they had proper medical care? At least now you know, Dorinda said quietly. And you can fix it going forward. How do I fix years of neglect? How do I make up for? You don't. Dorinda's voice was firm. You can't undo the past, Dominic. You can only commit to being better in the future. And you prove that commitment through consistent action, not dramatic gestures. He drove in silence for several miles before speaking again. Thank you for making me go there. For forcing me to see it. I didn't make you do anything. You chose to go. You chose to listen. You chose to offer real solutions instead of empty words. Dorinda looked out the window at the landscape passing by. That's the difference between the Alpha King I rejected 3 months ago and the man sitting next to me now. The old you would have sent an underling to handle it. This version of you showed up personally and took responsibility. Is it enough? Dominic asked. Am I doing enough to prove I can change? Dorinda thought about that as they crossed into the main Nightshade territory, passing the border markers that indicated they were officially back in Dominic's domain. She thought about the supplies he'd left for her, the rogues he'd protected her from, the vulnerability he'd shown in admitting his failures. She thought about Alara's tears and anger and the careful hope in her eyes when she'd agreed to come back. Ask me again in a month, Dorinda said finally. After I've seen how you handle the council meeting, how you treat Omegas in daily interactions, whether you actually follow through on your promises to Alara and the border settlements. Change isn't a single moment, Dominic. It's 1,000 small choices, repeated consistently over time. A month, Dominic repeated. I can work with that. They pulled up to the territory's administrative building just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. True to his word, Dominic had arranged for the council to meet them immediately, documents already prepared, witnesses assembled. The hearing took less than an hour. Dorinda's autonomy was guaranteed in writing, witnessed by 12 council members, and filed as official pack law. Her rejected mate bond was legally recognized, with provisions that prohibited Dominic from pressuring her about it under penalty of losing his Alpha King status. Her housing, employment, and freedom to leave the territory were all secured. And when it was done, when the last signature was placed and the documents were sealed, Dorinda felt something she hadn't experienced in months: safety. Where do you want to go? Dominic asked as they left the building. I can take you to your old apartment, or there's a house on the eastern edge of the territory that's been vacant for months. Nice place, quiet, good security. Or literally anywhere else you'd prefer. My apartment, Dorinda decided. I want to sleep in my own bed. See my things. Remember who I was before all this happened. Dominic drove her there without argument, carried her single bag up the stairs without being asked, and stood awkwardly in the doorway when she unlocked her door. "Thank you," Dorinda said, "for keeping your promises today. For going to see Alara. For putting everything in writing. Thank you for giving me the chance to try." Dominic's smile was tentative. "So, tomorrow? Can I see you tomorrow? Maybe breakfast at that cafe you like, the one with the vanilla lattes?" Dorinda thought about saying no, thought about putting distance between them while she processed everything that had happened. But then she remembered her grandmother's words about courage being the willingness to be vulnerable despite the risk. "Breakfast sounds good," she said. "But you're buying. Deal?" Dominic's smile widened into something genuine and warm, and for the first time, Dorinda saw what he might have looked like if he'd been raised differently. If his father hadn't broken him down and built him into a cold alpha king. If he'd been allowed to be human instead of just powerful. He left, and Dorinda closed the door behind him, leaning against it as reality finally hit her. She was home. She was safe. And the alpha king she'd rejected was actually, genuinely trying to become someone worthy of a second chance. Whether he'd succeed or fail remained to be seen. But at least now, for the first time in months, Dorinda had the luxury of finding out at her own pace, on her own terms, with her autonomy protected and her choices respected. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to her friends, "I'm back. I'm okay. Long story. Coffee tomorrow?" The responses came immediately, filled with relief and questions and promises to be there. Her support system, her chosen family, the wolves who'd worried about her while she was gone. Dorinda walked through her apartment, touching familiar things, reconnecting with the life she'd left behind. Tomorrow would bring challenges, facing the pack, dealing with gossip, figuring out what came next with Dominic. But tonight, she was just going to sleep in her own bed, in her own space, as a free wolf with choices and options and a future that belonged entirely to her. And maybe, just maybe, that future might include an alpha king who'd learned that strength wasn't about control. It was about having the courage to change. Hit subscribe if you believe in accountability over authority. Those who want power without responsibility won't click it.